Spoilers for Chapter 5, but if you needed the spoiler warning, hurry the hell up, it's been a month already. Allow me to start with an excerpt from my first Chapter 5 playthrough.
Insubordinate piece of trash. This is why you're my favorite character.
Kris Dreemurr is one of the most fascinating characters in all of Deltarune to me. We're over halfway through Toby Fox's flagship saga, and yet, compared to contemporaries Susie, Rouse, and even Noelle, it doesn't feel like they've developed as much, and we don't have as good a read on their character or their goals. At least, on the surface. With them being a silent protagonist from our perspective, the player has to piece together all their facets through paying attention to NPC dialogue, the narration, and even moments in the gameplay. That's what I'm going to do today. I want to explore Kris's character and what we can figure out about them so far to see just what it is that appeals to me so much. Why, even though we play as the soul, Susie is the real hero of the story, and all the other leads get more narrative focus, Kris is always the first thing I think of when it comes to Deltarune. Let's start with the foundation. Toby Fox is a fan of making his human characters questionably interpretive. Look at Kris's predecessors, Frisk and Kara, the only humans we get to know remotely anything about beyond their virtue and equipment. The former has no past, does everything we want them to as if they were just an extension of us, never speak, and a blind player is led to believe we named them at the start, only for this notion to be disproven near the end of the pacifist route. Kara's personality is never directly elaborated on in-game unless you talk to Azrael in the True Pacifist epilogue, something pretty out of the way, and their only on-screen appearance is the route where the world is stretched to its limit, Frisk really does cease to be, and Kara is more so an allegory for the gratuitous need to get stronger in traditional RPGs. But contrary to somewhat popular belief, both are their own people. Kara having a backstory at all shows this, along with their apparent chocolate obsession, and Frisk has implied personality traits such as a distaste for soda and finding determination in plenty of circumstances. Kris, in Chapter 1, appears to be a similarly blank character that Frisk is presented as. They don't talk to anyone unless prompted, they don't interject any personal thoughts into prompted responses, and we're in direct control of every action. But Deltarune seeks to make Kris and the player distinct at an early, yet pivotal moment. The end of Chapter 1. This isn't an out-of-nowhere moment. Even in Chapter 1, there are hints that Kris isn't what they seem. Talking to various townsfolk after returning to the Light World shows that they had a life before us. Chapter 1's ending had a lot of people believing Kris was either secretly evil, or possibly possessed by Kara, though the latter was very clearly a byproduct of Deltarune initially being seen as a sequel. Come Chapter 2, we find that only part of the first idea was true, and more prevalently, a small minority of fans who thought Kris was just exercising autonomy at our expense ended up being correct. It's here when we also start to see Kris express themselves more when prompted. They're enthusiastic towards dying to Queen and giving her a passionate toast if you choose to beat her the slow way, appreciate finding moss to eat, something they gave no inclination toward in Chapter 1, and will answer people without the right spirit if they don't agree with your choice, whether it's being stupefied at the idea of submitting to Birdley, being content with supposedly losing sleep about being Susie's partner, and barely being able to say yes when Susie asks if they're okay after Spamped in Neo, proven further by yelling if you answer no. So, okay. They're at odds with us at times, but they still seem to be on our side. Why are they making a dark fountain? Yeah, look in the right places in Chapter 3, or just wait until the Holiday House sequence in Chapter 4, and we find that Kris is working against us when they get the opportunity. They're in cahoots with the one concrete overarching villain, the Roaring Knight. But again, look in the right places, and it seems like even this isn't all willing. This is where a lot of the intrigue comes from with Kris. Conflicting loyalty, or as Dorkt once put it, duty versus desire. But before we go into how much they commit to either side, let's build a general figure of Kris's personality. The immediate thing we can tell is that they're typically a loner, an outcast. While no one's outright contemptuous towards them aside from Birdley, who as we later figure out does it out of envy, it's rather telling that Toriel rescinds her punishment for losing contact when Kris says they were spending time with a friend, and if you call her after Cyberworld, she considers 2 days in a row with a friend a record. The only hometown resident who lacks any reservations about them outside of their own family is Pizza Pants of all people. And given Kris's demeanor, you can't truly blame all of them. Even when we don't directly choose it, they're prone to some bizarre actions as a natural prankster. The first things we can hear Rudy recall them doing is getting tangled up in the Holidays light display and hiding under Noelle's bed to make her scared of humans under the bed. Noelle herself recalls Kris smearing their arms with ketchup and saying it's blood, saying Icy was real and eats kids, and chasing her while holding out a heart pillow saying they ripped their own out. This extends outside the Holiday family too. They're described by both the Pippins and Flying Aces as someone who loves to cheat, and in one of Noelle's blog pages, an account that's clearly Birdly complains about prank calls from someone, who then helps reinstall a game he deleted and plays with him. Gee, wonder who that is. Kris's apparent rivalry with Birdly also lets us know how smart they really are. He describes Kris as a distant number 3 out of a class of 9, but later admits that he's been leeching off of Noelle, meaning that Kris, despite being the weirdo who barely talks, sleeps through half the class regularly, and doesn't respect the teacher, is the best performer besides the class paragon. We even get to see some quick thinking from them ourselves. Look at Chapter 2's ending. They slashed Toriel's tires knowing she would notice / get sugar out of the car, thus giving her a reason to call the police. They opened the door so Undyne would have a reason to investigate, and Tenna occupying the hero's time while keeping Toriel at bay was Kris's idea for him. They prove how good a shot they are with their throws, and knew to hide under Dessa's bed to snipe us and keep her guitar out of reach. It's not just in moves to antagonize us either. Every act command, in some way, is Kris's idea, and when they can't find Susie in the dark zone of the second sanctuary, they take advantage of our perspective shifting to use the soul as a sonar and find Susie on their own. All this points to Kris being a quick-thinking gremlin that's remarkably good at reading the situation and people involved, whether it's for their own amusement or to forward the plan at hand. They'd have to be in order to subvert inputs they don't agree with from us. What about their other interests and skills? Well, they're shown to demonstrate some skilled reflexes. I already mentioned their busted throwing aim, but then there's one story Noelle recalls in her blog of Susie throwing a fastball apple at Kris, only for them to deflect it with a notebook, catch the thing, and take a bite. All without showing a single shred of fear towards someone who just threatened to bite them in half. No wonder their act against King becomes courage. No wonder faint courage is one of the candidates for their personal theme. Kind of unrelated, when Susie says someone will make them disappear and Toriel will be happy without them, I imagine their response was something like, "You're right, they will. She'll be happy that I'm gone, and even happier that you made me disappear." Susie at her worst still respected Toriel. The idea of hurting her would totally make Susie shift gears and run. Back on track, Kris holds some fascination towards less than usual hobbies for someone who's 17 at most. Even before their first Dark World, or at least the first one we know they went to, they've shown an interest in magic and even studied occult with Caddy, something you wouldn't expect at first given how she isn't much of a talker. Actually, the two seem to have a surprising amount in common. Both are the youngest and seemingly oddest in their families, both have an unlikely best friend they'd clearly give the world for, both possibly play second fiddle to a friend in a romantic pairing involving Susie, and both are rarely inclined to show emotion, but do so more the further into the story we go. Wonder if Toby's ever going to build on that. Their enthusiasm towards blades is enough for them to subtly reference Kiwami Japan with their knives made of highly improbable materials, and carry a personal one around, acting like giving it to Susie for her second sanctuary is her passing a special boundary. They're a skilled gamer, but not enough for it to be their life given how dryly they say that if you make them, and perhaps most prominent is their skill on the piano. They played for hospital patients in the past, would play the one at Noelle's house when no one was listening, and the one thing they do when it seems like they have a breather without the soul? This plays into their apparent awareness of the game's rules. Rouse is aware of the background music and appears surprised when Susie hears him hum it, so for Kris to play these songs shows they know more about the true nature of the world than it seems. Not just that, to hear them play the piano requires a deep amount of trust. Concert for You, a song in the soundtrack, refers to just the plink they make on a piano when the soul is in. They won't play for us, they stopped playing at Noelle's house if they noticed her, and it isn't until Susie encourages them that they play for a crowd, but take some pride in surprising people with their skill. The piano is theirs, and theirs alone. The one activity they can always take refuge in no matter the consequences, and they won't let us take a hold unless they have to, or if they're willing to with Susie in mind, like with the organ after the door opens. Only after the solo performance with their sweeping motions are we allowed to make any inputs. Speaking of inputs, something I don't think that many people talk about when it comes to discerning Kris is the narration. Remember back in Undertale, how a popular theory was that all the flavor text was filtered through Kara's perspective as a ghostly follower of the protagonist, a theory I still believe in? Here, a similar idea is actually in place. We can see that some of what we read has Kris's personal touch to it, such as their relief of the teen zone remaining how it is before Chapter 4, abhorring the name Birdley gave Noelle's cactus, or wondering if Toriel had to say on the idea of proper distancing for the school dance. My favorite one is them looking at the Birdley statue with admiration until Noelle plays along, only to then think it sucks. Something they seemingly communicate with just expressions since she never mentions them talking. I think this makes the utter lack of flavor text in Chapter 5's Weird Route all the more chilling. They're so emotionally done they can't bother to comment on anything. And this is speculation on my end, but I'm wondering, if or when we can finally sort things out with Kris, they'll use the flavor text to talk to us directly. Some within the Dreemurr household in Chapter 5's normal route already looks like them actively questioning our priorities. But you know what? I think it's time we delve into that disconnect. The conflict between their enigmatic goals with the Knight, their position as supposed hero alongside genuine friends genuinely trying to save the world, and where we play our part in that strain. Shall we start with the first? We don't really know how long they've been in league with the Knight. With the bombshell that they've been around for years, I doubt Kris was responsible for their origin. At most, it was unintentional. However it was that Kris did get into contact with the Knight, it's clear that that takes top priority when it comes up. That's one half of why they're so antagonistic to us. Now, it doesn't really show up in Chapter 1 or the majority of 2, but the way they orchestrated Chapter 3 and make the Dark World of 5 was for the express purpose of giving the Knight a target. Two ideas are in place. Either Kris intended for Toriel to be taken but we held off the Knight long enough for them to settle for Undyne, or Kris knew Undyne would show up before the Knight could take Toriel and intended for her capture. Given Kris's ability to predict things and the fact that they try to convince her the Dark Worlds are real if you prompt them, I think it's the latter, though Asgore's capture in Chapter 5 makes the former more credible. However you slice it, this shows that Kris values their job more than the safety of their parents, or even the needs of their friends. Kind of. Gotta stress the kind of. When I say they value their role more than their friends' needs, I'm mainly talking about the shelter codes. Pay enough attention in the church segment of Chapter 4, and you'll see that Kris is deliberately being vague when asking people, only compiling the bare minimum details for Susie to work with, though it is enough for her to think of going to Noelle's house. Said house segment is even more obvious, with Kris doing everything to keep us away from the guitar, and when Susie gets it, alerting Carol and deleting their contacts to prevent us from being able to trace their calls. And when we seal the Flower Kingdom fountain, Kris is ready to tear the second shelter code to pieces before Susie comes back and takes it. Their body language when the Knight is present gives us even more damning evidence. Reach them at the start of the Dark Sanctuary, and they will actively not move until the Knight finishes the job. And we can't forget how they throw the fight in Chapter 3, right? Damage output is lower than Rousey even if he's still packing the red scarf. They don't glean anything from checking if we make them do it, and if you somehow win without taking a single hit, they'll make a signal saying, "Dude, this isn't gonna work, wrap it up." The Knight, in turn, tends to target Kris the least when the Shadow Mantle isn't involved, and will only down them as opposed to the swoon they give Susie and Rousey. To say nothing of their knighting nudge at the end of quote-unquote winning. It all paints an ugly picture, and yet it also tells us a lot about the opposite. Look at the flavor text. You feel a migraine coming on. You feel surrounded. Your heartbeat becomes twisted. This isn't Weird Route spammed in Neo. There's no reason to differentiate between our thoughts and their thoughts unless you prove you have nothing to do that day. And we can't actually feel these things since we're just behind a screen. These aren't only subtle attack warnings. Kris is actively strained fighting the Knight. But why would they be if they're allies? Or better yet, if Carol's in on it with them, why would they remark about their shoulder feeling like ice? Why faceplant in what looks like disinterest when on the phone? Why do they still get their shit kicked in at the end of the night fight even if you win, quote unquote. Or how about this? Let one of your allies fall against the knight, and Kris will start dealing a normal amount of damage. Leave Kris the only one standing, and they'll hit with the force of both allies combined and only get stronger. Why do that to their effective boss? Some will say it's the soul's power pushing through, to which I say how? When have we had the power to force higher damage numbers? We haven't, but if you need evidence of Kris altering their strength, look no further than Tenna. Their output is usually half against the TV man, but go down the route that encourages them to be violent and have the ally they don't even like much spill the beans about their deal, and for the actual fight, their output is triple. Or weird route spam to Neo. Yeah, part of it is balancing, but basic game mechanics have always played an active role in the story. Kris is pushing themselves to hit harder because they know they have to. For the knight, there's a line they're unwilling to cross, so the increased numbers are bound to be them voicing their displeasure for as much as they can get away with. Because through all their unhelpfulness, and all the shit they pull behind people's backs, Kris still cares about their friends. They have from the start. They defend Susie from King's attack without her input. They don't approve of Monster Kid badmouthing her. Waiting until Kris reunites with Susie and Rousey to find the moss insinuates they waited for her willingly. Susie T is a full heal for them in Chapter 2 compared to all the others being worth less than CD bagels. They see Susie as their festival partner and won't mean it if you answer with somebody else. Susie eases their uncertainty about their identity when looking at the mirror. They go to the diner if you have the money for it in the same way Kris would with the older brother they idolized for years. Their appreciation for Susie is one of the most unambiguous things about them, to the point where it could be more than just friendship. Chapter 5 offers 2 plausible ideas. 1. Kris likes her romantically and is torn up by her bonding with Noelle, or 2. Kris is worried about being forgotten as the two explore their own feelings. Either way, they show the maturity not to selfishly come between them, evidenced by them not rebelling against us when we try to push the two together. Rousey, on the other hand, is someone who had to grow on Kris. Rousey T was only a half heal for Kris in Chapter 2, and only 10 more than Rousey and Noelle T heal each other, since they're hardly acquainted. We can treat them with kindness, but they don't show any emotion of their own at first. Look at the sword route. Kris flinches on the final board when we have to kill Susie and Rousey's avatars to move on. Both of them. Doesn't matter that they like one more than the other. Chapter 4 is when Kris truly crosses over. Regardless of what we say, they encourage Rousey to be his own person when they see his empty room, and they hug him of their own volition at the end of the chapter if you say, it's okay not to smile. It even shows in the code, because answering Rousey with that causes a flag that changes the Rousey T to heal 100 instead of 60 like it did before, implying that Kris now considers him a genuine friend almost on Susie's level, even though all T turns rotten when Chapter 3 begins and can't be bought again as of Chapter 5. And then there's Noelle. Noelle is an interesting case. Being a major character yet not one of the main 3 places her in an easy love interest role, and she certainly is that for Susie. Despite being Kris's neighbor and the two seemingly knowing each other better than anyone, calling them friends oversimplifies it. Their T only heals 70 towards each other, and context clues point to them having drifted apart the same way their families did overall. The adventures don't fully patch that up, because Noelle notices the behavioral differences we cause with Kris more than anyone, even their own parents. But that doesn't mean there's nothing between them anymore. And we're able to exploit that. The weird route flips several dynamics on their head. Kris goes from agent of the villain working towards a goal we can't grasp yet, to a hero antagonist trying to get everything back on track while minimizing the damage we caused. They hated what we did from the start, enough to where both Susie and Rousey notice how shaken they were by the time they reunite. Instead of just slashing the tires, their moment of freedom in Chapter 2 also has them carrying Birdley all the way to the hospital after he gets some brain freeze, reassuring Noelle that everything was a stupid prank, and removing the thorn ring. This shows that any malicious actions taken on their own only fuel the higher goals with the knight. Anything outside of that, they'll try to rectify, regardless of how they feel about the afflicted. However, their struggle to act in multiple interests reveals a flaw I briefly mentioned before: lack of foresight. They may be great at predicting actions, but they don't always recognize how their actions can backfire. Their efforts to block the guitar only cause Susie to get it, and their efforts to fix everything while still keeping people in the dark about themselves meant they didn't think to throw away the thorn ring, allowing us to undo everything and make it all worse. This dialogue prompt, given how Noelle says Kris didn't say anything, is them pleading with us to stop. They'll bolt out of the room if the soul... And after kicking us for a bit, everything about their body language says they're kicking themselves. Tell Gerson you want to go nowhere, and he gets the feeling Kris is having relationship issues. Have him give Kris an apple at his tea break, and they'll bite the core of it, seemingly to gnaw at the seeds in their trace amounts of cyanide. Force them to think of Noelle when Susie gets the long sheet, and they'll seemingly panic before she comes back. Have them try to pray for her in the lobby, and instead of shifting to her dad in the normal route, they'll kick the candle stand. Have them say they won't play the piano again, and instead of just coughing it off like in the normal route, they'll bite their hand. Kris is already a character rife with self-loathing, a common theme among Deltarune's protagonists it seems like, but going through the sanctuaries on the weird route exacerbates that to the point where they just give up the next day. No flavor text, their only defense is to sleep the whole day away without eating and cling to the bed when we gain control, and I'm convinced the only reason they don't try to fight off Noelle's urging is because they've lost all hope that anything can get better. Whether they wrong warped out of bounds or just straight up drowned, Kris's will is dead, only to get a second wind if we don't follow through all the way. But no matter what route we go, no matter what choices you make, so far, there's no way to really make Kris happy. Their self-image is smeared by our puppeteering, they don't enjoy the actions made in service to the night, and while Susie's having a great time with Castletown as our home and planning to introduce Noelle to it, they walk away, resigned, knowing they'll have to come clean, betray and possibly lose the friends they genuinely care for. It's easy to, at a first glance, blame them for digging their own grave, but with all the conflicting messages, all the different behaviors they show, all the signs that point to their inner turmoil, and it's hard for me to feel anything but sympathetic, even when they're actively trying to impede us. They probably wouldn't want to hear any of that, but it won't change how much we care for them. The sword route is one of my favorite parts of the entire game. It's also one of the most stressful parts for Kris. We see from how they look away at the end of the second board, the way they flinch at killing the other two, pushing away from the shelter, and literally any reaction they have to us upon our leave. 5 days before Chapter 5, I uploaded Sword.mp4, a video that turns this creepypasta-inspired segment into an actual creepypasta. But instead of the actual player like typical game pastas, I made Kris the narrator. I wanted to see how well I grasped my favorite character when I was the one interpreting their feelings and not the actual creator. And to corroborate everything we could glean now that the journey's gonna take a turn for the darker, I made this video. It's been, 23 minutes? Effectively double that of the last character analysis I made? I like to think that I wasn't talking absolute bunk. Kris is layered. They're a gremlin and a weirdo who levitated toward other weirdos in the time we've seen them, but at the same time, they're smart, perceptive, and pose some pretty strong reflexes. They're a person of several hobbies and odd interests, but hard to top in the ones they excel in. They work against us and are an agent of the game's overarching villain, but they truly love their friends and will make sure nothing unnecessary happens to them. If something does, they're the first to make it better. And through it all, they're strained. Strained between sides. Strained between autonomy and being able to live. And so, they keep to the solution they always have from the moment this adventure started. Play along, and play on. There's still a lot we don't know of Kris. We don't know what promise they made. We don't know if it's Carol, the Knight, or someone else holding that leverage over them. We don't know what traumatic experience they went through to justify the man offering eggs. And regardless of how you interpret the weird route of Chapter 5, whether they drowned or broke free of the game's boundary, we don't know if they're gonna make it through the end of the story. All we can do now is hope. Hope they can find a way to stick by their friends. Hope they can come to a consensus with the soul. Because I know, once they do, if they do, there won't be a damn better hero than Kris Dreemurr.